Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a very exciting topic, one of the many flavors of AI, but perhaps one of the most interesting things for me to be here talking about this is that very few of us were talking about this a year ago. It's really rare that something explodes so incredibly in such a short time. There's a lot of chatter. What we hope to do today is to cut through some of that, at least in one area. We're going to have some time for questions at the end, so save them up. I'll try to give you a warning before we go to you. And in case folks didn't know, we are going to run for a full hour, so please be ready with some questions. You can read the full bios of our panelists online and in the app, but I'm going to do a quick, brief introduction. Starting 3 down from me, Brandon Wales is the first ever executive director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, where he serves as the senior career executive that helps to oversee the execution of CISA's operation. Brandon served as CISA's acting director from November of 2020 through July of 2021, taking the job when Chris Krebs was famously fired by tweet, and he stepped down into his current role when Jen Easterly was confirmed by the Senate. 2 down for me is Alexandra Reeve. She is the CEO for the Center for Democracy and Technology, a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization fighting to protect civil rights and civil liberties in the digital age. Alex previously served as the chief counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee overseeing innovation and consumer protection, and prior to joining CDT, she was the founding executive director of Georgetown University's Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy. And then directly to my left, Tara Murphy-Dougherty is the CEO of Greene, a commercial data company in the defense and technology space. She has been living the AI world longer than perhaps some of us. Previously, she has held leadership positions in industry and government, including at Palantir Technologies and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. She also serves on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, including the National Defense University Foundation and the National Security Innovation Base Program at the Ronald Reagan Institute. And finally, last but not least, Alissa Starzak is the Vice President and Global Head of Public Policy at Cloudflare, a web performance and security company that protects nearly 20% of the websites worldwide, perhaps one of the biggest but least known cyber companies out there. Previously, Alissa was General Counsel of the Department of the Army and was the Deputy General Counsel for Legislation at the Department of Defense. She also served as an Assistant General Counsel in the CIA's Office of General Counsel. So as I said, we're going to be here today to talk about artificial intelligence, and particularly focusing on the intersection of generative AI and cybersecurity and privacy. AI is not the first revolutionary technology we've had come down the pike recently. It seems that every couple years we are told that we are at one inflection point or another. Thinking back a bit, I recall recently some very smart people promised me that blockchain was going to save the world, but I'm still waiting for that to happen. So I want to start by kind of setting the table for what we really think is going on, to try to get a sense of how big a deal AI and generative AI is. So I'm going to go down the line and ask the panelists here, broadly speaking, whether they think that AI is evolutionary or revolutionary. And if they were warned, if their pick is revolutionary, I've asked them to share something they think that we will be doing that is completely new because of generative AI in a few years, or something that will be fundamentally different. And by fundamentally different, my definition, and you all are free to use your own, is, when I think about researching when I was a kid in the 80s, it was encyclopedias or going to the library. Being able to do that from my computer at home far after high school, when the internet became widely available, was truly revolutionary. Then being able to do that research from my phone when the internet migrated to smartphones, to me, is closer to evolutionary. So with that, I guess I will just run straight down. Tara, if I can go to you first.
Sure, yes. Well, thrilled to be here. Thanks, Jeff, for moderating. Thanks so much to the Aspen Institute for having all of us. I personally think this is the most exciting topic of this whole session this year, so thrilled to be here. Great question. Undoubtedly, the answer is both. And perhaps the fact that I just answered it that way shows that I started my career in defense policy, where everything depends. But it is both, because we see, and as you mentioned, my company has been working on machine learning technologies for almost a decade at this point. So certainly, generative AI is evolutionary. but it is also revolutionary. And the reason that I think that's true is because we're going to continue to see not just tremendous advances in terms of the technology of AI itself and the applications, but because we're going to continue to see the rate of those advances increase. So what is that going to generate? Well, frankly, it beats the hell out of me. And I think that's the point of revolutionary AI. You know, the example that I thought of in reflecting upon your question is back when I was playing Oregon Trail on my Apple II, could I have imagined that today I would be playing those games on my iPhone? Certainly not. And so maybe just the one specific example I would give about the impact on the revolutionary side is I think that we are going to fundamentally change the way that we think of and use information. Full stop. Information is going to mean something to my children's generation that it doesn't mean to ours. And the reason is because we can operate with data at such a mind-blowing scale with the applications of AI, and particularly machine learning applications, that we can create visibility and human-level understanding of a different kind. So one way to think about this is, remember during the Cold War, when we talked a lot about making the seas or the oceans transparent, we were obsessed with this idea of being able to see submarine activity because it was so critical to competition with the Soviets. Well, today, one of the things that my company does is we have made global markets transparent. We've made supply chains transparent. You can watch a part traverse from core components into an aircraft carrier, a fifth-generation fighter jet. And that is going to change the world.
So you have lawyers on both sides, and at the end, and you were the first person to give the both answer. It depends answer. It's usually our role as lawyers to say that. But Alex, over to you.
So I run the Center for Democracy and Technology. The types of issues that we think about in the space of generative AI, I think the concerns are largely evolutionary when you look at the lessons that we've already been working on for the past decade or so. So when I think about generative AI, I think about the impact on public discourse, right? What deep fakes are going to mean for elections, how much easier it is to target people with voter suppression messages when you can really, at speed, generate personalized messages that really speak in an authentic voice to a particular audience. When we think about those types of concerns about extortion and consumer fraud, or about the privacy concerns that come up in this space that I imagine we're going to talk about today, we've actually been seeing those trends for a pretty long time, since the move to the online information ecosystem that we live in today. What's different about it? Scale, speed, and affordability, the democratization of these tools. So now you don't need advanced computing technology to generate a deepfake. You can pull it up and do it pretty quickly on your iPhone. What does that mean in terms of expanding the threat vector and how we have to think about the responsible management of an information ecosystem? So evolutionary, revolutionary when you go back to a deeper time period.
We are going to talk some about privacy in a bit. I'm very interested to hear where you think this will take us. Brandon, from your perspective at CISA.
Sure. So I look at it as a kind of slow motion revolution because AI has been with us for so long. But there have been, I think, key moments that have been revolutionary in the mind of the public, as opposed to in things that have dramatically changed the environment. So 1996, Deep Blue beats Garry Kasparov. It didn't actually change chess immediately. Over 20 years before computer engines began to fundamentally change how people played and trained for chess games. And I think we're likely to see something now with generative AI, ChatGPT, where it has shocked the mind of the public, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow things have fundamentally changed. We're going to be in a slow evolutionary period after this while we continue to learn how to use this technology for both good and bad, and we understand its full implications. I think, as was already said, we could not have predicted in the first days of the budding internet what we would look like today and the ways in which it affects both positively and negatively the public. We're likely to have the same exact experience with AI and the various applications of it. So I don't think it is necessarily revolutionary, but I think when we look back over the course of 20 years from now, we're going to say it definitely has had some type of revolutionary effect, but today would be too hard to, I think, fully predict.
And Alissa, from your end, where you all live in a large data world and have, as Tara has, seen the evolution, we used to call it machine learning, but what are you seeing, and do you see any true generational revolutionary, not slow revolution? I like that, Brandon. That was very well taken the question.
I actually think what you're hearing is different definitions of revolution. So what does it actually mean? I think consistently, we've been talking about AI and machine learning for a long time. From an industry perspective, it's something we've used for years, and it's been slowly improving, and that's evolutionary. I think what happened this past fall, though, was that ChatGPT was released to the public, and all of a sudden, people's interest was sparked about how they could use it. And I think that's where you get into the revolutionary space, because all of a sudden you can imagine, how will this change my life? How will it make the administrative tasks that take forever, trying to make a PowerPoint, the dumbest things, right? Trying to find the picture that works for you, trying to do all of the things that all of a sudden can happen like that. Right? So the difference, I think, is actually the public imagination, and that's what has the potential to be something revolutionary. I think you will continue to see the evolutionary side on the company piece, how it's applied in industry, how it's applied in technology. Those will continue. The public imagination piece, the idea that you can create new things that will diminish administrative tasks in a huge way is potentially revolutionary.
Great. I want to focus now on the cybersecurity aspects in particular. If you read the literature around LLMs, large language models, generative AI, and cybersecurity, there are really three main concerns if you distill it down. First is the security of the systems that run the large language models. Second is the security and integrity of the data they use. And then third is discussion of how attackers could use AI to improve their tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. So Brandon, maybe I'll start with you, and then we'll see what others have to say. Do you think there's anything missing from this? And what concerns you the most from the national security perspective?
Sure. The one thing that I think that was left out of your definition, which I think are three good ones, is the potential changes that this has for the introduction of AI into the customers of AI, or the businesses that are now integrating AI into critical applications, the security around those, because that will undoubtedly change. When we think about kind of complexity in cybersecurity that changes over the course of history, kind of an order of magnitude change from the dawn of the computer age to the dawn of the internet age. Now we're going to likely see another order of magnitude change between the dawn of the internet age and the dawn of the AI age, where we've gone from zero marginal cost to generate content. But this is going to be integrated into critical applications in ways that the businesses operating those don't fully understand. And the security around that, how do they do that in a new and novel way? How do they deal with the threats posed in this environment to those systems are going to be new challenges that we're going to have to take on. And I think my fear is that there is going to be a mad rush to market share here to get as many applications fed with and underpinned by new generative AI technology before we've had a chance to figure out what are the new risks we are introducing into critical applications and networks, particularly related to systems that may be controlling functions that have critical public health and safety impacts and national security impacts. So we really think that this needs to be, is a picture-perfect case where we need to be thinking about how we build in security up front, because it will be far too late if these systems are widely deployed before we've had an understanding about the risk that they're introducing and how to secure them appropriately.
Can I drill down and make sure I understand what your point? What I hear a lot about is attackers are going to use, whether it's to write a more sophisticated spear phishing email or to develop effective code. Are you saying you're worried that these systems themselves will have vulnerabilities of some sort that will give a gateway to an attacker, either for a point attack or persistent access?
Exactly. And I don't take anything away from the idea that these tools will enable bad actors to do their job more effectively and efficiently. Now, I don't, even leaving aside questions about whether these pose, existential threats to the human race, if every year attackers get 10 to 15% better at their job if they can code malware more efficiently and effectively, and it gets around one more layer of network security, if they're able to get around efforts to find false content as part of mis and disinformation campaigns. All that will happen. But at the same time, I think we need to understand how these things are being introduced inside of critical networks, because that is where I think we can see some of the greatest impacts.
So Tara, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the defensive implications are for you defending a company, and then maybe Alissa about the defensive implications defending 20% of the world's websites and companies.
Yeah, happy to. So I come at a question like this in this topic from two perspectives, like you're saying. On the one hand, there's the regulatory question. What is the United States federal government going to do? What is Congress going to do in order to protect? And I think we'll probably get into more of this in the privacy side, but also from a security perspective, put in place checks or governors on that race to market share. I have probably the inverse fear that you do, Brandon. My fear is that we slam on the brakes in what is right now the most important competition happening in the world. And I do mean that on the global stage. So that's the second way in which I think about this issue, which is as much as we're thinking about, importantly, thinking about the defensive side of the opportunity afforded to our adversaries, there is tremendous offensive potential for the United States as well. And today, the United States is still the best in the world when it comes to technology talent and technology innovation. And just as a data point, look at the companies that have put out the best large language models available in the world today. They're all American. And so we are at the forefront of this, but it is just a sliver of a lead. And one area where our greatest global competitor, China, and specifically the Chinese Communist Party, is significantly stronger than the United States is in willpower. And they have been, as a party, very vocal and very dedicated to a goal of being the global AI leader by 2030. So the race is on in their minds. And I think that we have to think about the defensive side, but we've also got to think about the opportunity space here.
Yep. Alissa?
So I looked at the sort of categories, and I was like, yes, that's the right broad set of categories of concerns. But I think people don't understand how they intermingle. So let's talk about that sort of spear phishing example. So imagine now you have a big, large language model that actually takes in your personal data, analyzes it, puts something out that is an amazing phishing email that then results in a compromise of a system, right? That's one of the fears that comes up. So what is this set of concerns? Is it that your personal information went into it in the first place? Is it how it got analyzed to put out something that was about you? Or is it how it got used in the end? Because when you start thinking about regulation and when you start thinking about defense, you have to think about all of those different places where things happen. So from a company standpoint, one of the things that we've thought about a lot is that question about what leaves a company, right? So you don't want your sensitive data going in to populate models that are public models because you don't know what will come out the other end. So if you can prevent some information from leaving, if you can put controls on the information that goes and feeds the model, that is one step in a layered defense of thinking about how AI systems can work. Right? That doesn't mean that you don't use AI systems internally, but it means that you put controls on what goes in, you know what's populating that model, you have some component of it, and then you think about the outputs as well, right? So think about what kinds of outputs what kinds of outputs can you have, and then how do you think about their uses? Those are all sort of different questions, and they all have different potential regulatory implications long term.
So when we talk about these tailored spear phishing emails, another way to use this would be, we've talked about micro-targeting and advertising for years, political and otherwise. Are we now talking about personally tailored micro-targeting, whether it's advertising or spear phishing? Alex, can you take it maybe from the advertising side?
Yeah, I think that really is one of the concerns, both from an advertising perspective, you can think about it in terms of voter outreach. We already see today how message has become increasingly sophisticated in its targeting of distinct populations to get a message that is targeted to them. We have also already seen interference in elections using these types of devices, right? Using text message campaigns to tell people misinformation about their polling location or wrong information about a particular person's position on an issue. One of the things that helps immunize people against that is, number one, there are other sources of information. Number two, sometimes you can tell when you're being targeted because the language either sounds stilted, it sounds like it's been artificially made or manipulated, or it looks like it's going out to a generic audience. Those are all things that generative AI helps solve, right? The messages that can be far more tailored to a much smaller audience because the messages are cheaper, faster, and easier to make, and can rely on combining personal information to make it relevant to you. So that really, and in addition to that, they can help address some of the language barriers or other signifiers that sometimes let people know that you're onto a phishing attack and it's not actually an authentic communication. So those are the types of threats that we see emerging in this space. It doesn't mean that regulation is easy, but this is why when we look at the impact of generative AI on consumers, the risk of fraud, the risk of extortion, the risk of more tailored voter suppression or voter interference are all real areas of concern and need for dialogue.
Just to try to make it practical for people to understand, tell me if this is a correct example, whereas a micro-targeting advertisement could be, they know that Jeff Greene's kids play hockey, so we're going to hit him with hockey stick sales in September when the season's starting. What we may see in the future is that with language based on an understanding of who I am and how I make my buying decisions, a email time targeted and appeal targeted. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. You could imagine that in a political campaign. You could imagine it in our advertising in general. I worry more, one of the areas is around fraud and deception, right? So really specific scams that now can be targeted. I actually testified in the Senate last week, and one of the witnesses alongside me was a woman who had received an extortion scheme over her phone. She was standing with one of her daughters at a practice one day and got a phone call that was her other daughter, her older daughter, screaming down the phone, saying, "Mom, I need help, and then it clicked over, and it was a person making a ransom demand. She went through the entire flow of trying to think how her family was going to find $50,000 to give in a suitcase that day before her teenage daughter called her and told her that she was safely at home. It was a deep fake that had been generated from a small snippet of her daughter's voice and had enough particular information to be able to reach the mother on her cell phone. So those are the types of schemes that we're already starting to see. Law enforcement needs to be ready to help respond to those, give people good information. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, I worry, as far as what we're going to see ahead.
So that's a nice lead into my next question of who do we think that this technology is going to help the most, on the attacker side, the defender side, or is it going to depend upon where we are in the cycle of attack and defend? Brandon, can I hit you with that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, like with most new technology innovations, it's going to favor the attackers, in part because the level of complexity that I discussed before, and also because they don't have to be right every time. They don't have to make it perfect every time. There's enough victims out there that if they only get 5 or 10% of the people to click on the phishing email, they've had a wildly successful ransomware campaign. And so all of these tools that make them 5 or 10% better, even if we fully harness the potential of AI for the defensive side and make our cybersecurity more sophisticated, it is unlikely to have the breadth and coverage necessary to deal with the threats if they are also amplified by these same tools. And so I think we have already lived through this with most other technologies in the internet age, and we are likely to live through it again now with AI.
Try to pick a fight at the end of the panel. Alyssa, maybe can you tell us from your end how you think AI is going to actually help you defend against existing threats and maybe these emerging ones?
Yeah, we need AI. I think that one of the realities is that we are going to be facing a threat of AI no matter what we do. And so the only way to respond back against it is actually to use AI ourselves. And AI has incredible potential. Going back, I think, to Tara's point, it has incredible potential to find anomalies and deploy them at scale. So if you think about that from a practical standpoint, what does it mean for a company like ours? If a vulnerability is identified and we can deploy it across our entire network, we can protect every website against it, right? It may be something that's fast, and maybe you want more protections down the road, but at least it's something initially that happens at scale in real time. And I think that is one of the things that we see with AI from a defender side. That doesn't mean I don't actually agree with Brandon. I think one of the challenges has always been that when you start talking about consumer-facing questions, of course, right now the systems that we have set up are not designed to protect consumers from things like fraud, and we have to rethink. I think we have to think about some of the models that we have right now that are about trade-offs, right? So, we talk about what are the components that fit into something. Well, if consumers have already given out their personal information, if all of that information is available and plugged into an AI model, those threats are going to be a lot more significant. So, what we need? Privacy legislation, things like that that can actually do some work in thinking about what the risks are to consumers, where even when defenders and attackers are both sort of going at it, at least consumers aren't the ones that suffer the most.
Can I chime in on this?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you something, because you talked about the will of the Chinese and Alissa talked about the inevitability. It made me wonder, does my question even matter? And maybe if you could riff off that and whatever else.
Sure. It does matter, Jeff.
Oh, thank you.
And part of the reason why is because I actually think that it's so important that we do two things when talking about artificial intelligence. One, we demystify it in terms of what are we actually talking about is going to manifest in your day-to-day lives, in the way our institutions run. And two, we learn not to be afraid of it. So I don't know if it's because I've had a security clearance for 20 years or it's generational or what, but I love the curated lifestyle. I want all of my ads to be targeted to me. I want my recommendation engines on Amazon, on Netflix, for my kids' clothes to be flawless. And I would like it if my bank would know when I'm making a purchase or when someone else is making a purchase with my information. Something that actually works pretty well today, because a lot of the banking and financial institutions have been using AI for years. So that's the consumer side of it. On the national security side of it, we never would have caught bin Laden if it weren't for the CIA's use of what was then very emergent machine learning technologies. Today, we're surfacing all sorts of nefarious behavior in, like I mentioned earlier, defense programs. So yes, there is an advantage to attackers when there's something new, because the lack of regulation allows people to act in the system in ways that we ultimately eventually want to control. But I would go back to just reminding people that you're using AI all the time, every day. And the United States federal government, when it comes to protecting American people, is actually doing the same in very practical ways. So while we want to be smart about protecting citizens and consumers and our own personal civil liberties, we also don't want to get so afraid by what some nefarious actor might do that we limit the progress that we're making that also serves all of these aims that make our lives better and safer, frankly, on a day-to-day basis.
Jeff, you asked us to fight on this panel. I didn't think we were going to be able to, but I do have a bone to pick. So we've done it. We found something to disagree about. And what I would take up here, so that example of commercial data practices, I think, is actually a really instructive one, right? So some people certainly like having their ads tailored to them, that it's the right brands for your kids' shoes. But it's a position of luxury to say that, right, when we're talking about ads for kids' shoes, not predatory loans, right? Exploiting people because you know that there's somebody with a predisposition to diabetes in the household. Not how people who are profiled to get particular job offers offered to them. The people that see some housing ads and the other lower income communities that do not see those same ads. So there are real ways that what can look like a beneficial use to the average consumer is really dangerous in terms of perpetuating inequality in our society. And the reason why I think that maps over to this question of kind of positive uses, my goodness, yes, I certainly believe that there are going to be positive uses of AI, and one's very much being used now to counter a lot of these threats. But it helps to reveal that we have to examine those uses closely to see how well they are going to work, and that actually is going to be part of the success story. I think we can talk about innovation, helping address national threats, helping address cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But we're still going to have to come down to the root cause of how are they working and are they fit for purpose. And so that remains an incredibly important framework and lens, I think, even as we talk about some of the potential benefits of these tools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Jeff, I would just only add that I think the benefits assume that we'll be able to get those to the people who need them. And I think we're looking at today, we have seen, and particularly in the cybersecurity realm, where that's not the case. We've got a wide swath of industry, small local governments that are target-rich and cyber-poor today. They're not going to get, all of a sudden, substantially better just because of AI. Those same challenges of having quality information security practices are going to transcend into the AI era, while the adversaries are going to be able to find them with improved techniques and improved capabilities. And so that's why it's not that we're not going to harness, and our cybersecurity community is not going to harness the potential of AI, because we're doing it today and we'll continue to grow with the technology. But there is going to be a class of industry, and that class includes things that we rely upon critically. Water utilities that service the American people, provide them safe drinking water. Hospitals that get impacted by ransomware today. AI can help if they have the resources to deploy them, if they have the people who can utilize those new technologies to protect themselves. And we've seen time and time again that they actually don't.
So go ahead, Alissa.
Yeah, can I add to that? I think one of those things is the questions that come from it, right? So we have to think about what they're trying to harness and who can harness it for them. Because it's not going to be that every hospital deploys AI for cybersecurity on their own. They're going to use companies to do it, right? They're going to use industry. They're going to use tools. And so one of the questions that we have now, in something that is really the dawn of sort of commercial application of AI in many ways, how do we rethink those questions? So Tara mentioned that we think about, that those individualized, consumer recommendations. Would we make those same decisions if you knew it would feed you stuff that was maybe not correct? How do you think about them now? Because what AI is an accelerant. It's going to change all of the directions that we're in, and it's going to make them go there faster and more efficiently and better. So think about that, and then think about the choices we've made, and think about whether we want to change direction, whether we want to put additional protections in place, whether we want to change the flow. That's the time that we're at now. And I agree. I think that AI has a remarkable amount of potential, but I also think we know a lot more than we did, that we know a lot more now than we did at the dawn of the internet about how things can be misused.
Brendan,
Since I'm the one who stirred up the hornet's nest, can I get one?
Thank you for that.
Yes, well, you're welcome. There's a bee around me, if anyone saw me doing this earlier, so I channeled it. There's one emerging thread of consensus, at least, among everything we just said. And frankly, I think they were phenomenal comments from my panelists, which is those institutions, state, local governments, hospitals, organizations that help the people in the United States who might not have access to them directly, requires investment from the United States. And I think that's something that likely all four of us would agree upon, and also goes back to that question of, if we have this nascent technology lead, how do we translate it into something that assures that we maintain the overall global lead that the United States is looking for? That means spending money. And it means spending money on the organizations and institutions that need to be able to leverage this emergent technology for their missions and to help American people.
So, Brandon, to your point about the water sector, a water sector that currently does not have the resources to deploy multi-factor authentication in most cases is not going to be deploying cutting-edge AI to protect their systems. And to Tara's point, we need to make that possible.
Yeah, I mean, and even in the case where we've actually seen water systems try to deploy new cybersecurity technology, they don't have the manpower that can effectively utilize it at scale, and it actually causes more problems because they don't really know what they're doing, and they're running down false leads all the time. And so I do think that there's a lot of things that we need to do to kind of examine how do we scale our network defense expertise down to the people who need it most. And I think Alissa is right. The model of putting all the burden on the end user is not the right one. The new national cyber strategy that was released at the beginning of the year makes this one of the kind of key principal shifts, that the burden needs to be placed on those best able to handle it. In this case, the burden really needs to be on the technology companies that provide them the underlying technology that's being exploited, whether through AI-enhanced techniques or not. But there is other things we can do along Tara's point to provide them more support.
Alex, you talked about deepfakes in the context of elections going forward. We are obviously heading into an election year. Do you think that we are at a point where we can use these technologies at all now to help educate people how to detect them, or are we behind that curve? Can we use this to help make our citizens more immune to mis and disinformation?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different levels to that question, right? So we have already in this election cycle seen deepfakes be generated, and we're at the very beginning of what is going to be a long journey. To be clear, not just in the US, but 2024 is a year of massive, very, very important elections around the world. So how much can AI help in that fight? So there is no question that AI can be used to help detect altered content. It can be used in the effort around content moderation, content analysis, and the social media platforms are doing that now. They need to do it better, they need to do it more, and we need to realize that it's not the silver bullet, right? So one of the things that my organization focuses on is how well the existing systems that social media platforms use now are working when you actually think about the interests of real users. And oftentimes, one of the complexities here is that we're talking about speech, the value of which, the authenticity of which, very much depends on context. And if you're applying a blunt instrument to moderate that content, to analyze that content, it can have a suppressive effect on very legitimate forms of communication. So just to give one example, we can think about controversial terms that are often used for hate speech purposes, are often used by marginalized communities as a source of reappropriation and empowerment for dialogue within their own discourse. A content analysis tool, which is AI, right? A content analysis tool that is just looking for those words in a vacuum is very likely going to suppress the legitimate speech of the marginalized communities that we most want to be able to find community and find empowerment online. I share that example because it shows that this is really complicated and that a system can't just, wave a magic wand and have all of the hate speech in the world or all of the fake speech in the world disappear. Same thing with mis and disinformation. We've looked at how this played out in the COVID pandemic. The way in which you talk about vaccines can have a real spectrum from what's authentic to what's not authentic, to what is deeply nefarious to public health, and what is just legitimate public discourse. So content moderation is really hard. It's really complicated. And so the idea of kind of AI now layering into that means we just have to act with caution and be thoughtful about it. The one other area, and again, this is a plug for resources. We came to Aspen and we just talked about the need for money in these fields. Is non-English language content analysis, which is hugely important for democracies and countries around the world. And again, when we look at the generative AI models right now, the vast majority of them have been developed on English language because we are word factories over here, and we've generated a lot of the training data that these tools have been developed on. And what happens when they're analyzing non-English content is that often that they are just doing a flat literal translation of that language and putting it through an English language model. That doesn't actually pick up cultural nuance. It doesn't pick up variances in language. So this is another area where, again, we have to think about AI with nuance. It can be incredibly helpful, but we can't over-rely on it. We need to keep getting the systems and tools better and more refined, and have humility about their effectiveness as we do so.
Hey, Brandon, from a U.S. election standpoint, CISA is one of the lead, if not the lead agencies to protect our elections. You've done quite a great job the past few. Is this AI and MISDIS part of your remit, or is that more big DHS looking at that?
So I think, these are questions that we're getting from the election community today. So we actually were doing briefings on AI to election officials in the last several weeks because just like everyone else in the public, they watched ChatGPT and they said, okay, how can this be used against us? What are the potential opportunities for us to use this to actually help enable what we're doing? So those conversations are starting. I think this is a place where we don't have all the answers yet. What are the ways in which we're going to battle disinformation, particularly foreign influence operations? We know foreign adversaries are already using and are contemplating using these tools to influence elections, both in the United States and overseas. So we're going to have to figure out the right way of grappling with it. I think today it is likely to be largely utilizing the tools we already have available to us. and it's going to be heavily dependent upon the platforms to make sure that they can discover foreign disinformation campaigns and get those offline as soon as possible.
If I can give one plug for something that CIS has been doing very well, so just we didn't pre-script this, but I've mentioned already that content analysis and content moderation is really hard. But one of the strategies I think a lot of people have rallied behind is, well, where are the trusted sources of authentic information that can be boosted and amplified, that journalists can point to, that social media platforms can point to, that voters can know to trust? And right now we've been falling behind even that. In the United States, my organization ran an analysis of all of the websites of all of the election administration officials in the US and found that only 1 in 4 is using a .gov domain. They're using things like, sunnyvalevotes.com as their place of putting out trusted information, which makes it really easy to spoof people, put out inaccurate information. We came to you guys, we've talked about it, and that's now kind of been part of the set of tools that CISA and others across DHS are putting out to election officials. So there's some really low-hanging fruit that we can talk about here to try and boost that trusted information ecosystem, even as we try and figure out some of the rest of the messy stuff.
We got about 20 minutes. I want to ask 2 more quick questions and then get some audience, but try to short circuit a bit on so we've talked a bit about government involvement. Tara, I heard you saying we need to be careful about how government leaps in. So with that in mind, if that's correct, can you give us some thoughts on where you think actually government can and should get involved at this point in time, whether it's regulation or legislation or other guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both are needed, regulation and legislation. And my concern comes from whether they come from a place of understanding the technology and lessons learned on what is actually beneficial, and don't come from a place of hysterics or fear. And I think that in the executive branch, some of the regulation, there's a very good understanding of the technology, and you look at what CIS is doing and NIST is doing, and actually I've been quite impressed. I'm not sure yet. We're just starting to hear things from Congress and their ideas.
Pre-licensing AI.
Yes, yeah. I'm not going to comment on that one. And I think there's a little, they're trying to figure it out. But I think the things that scare me are suggestions, and this wasn't even from Congress, this has been coming from the private sector as well, that we put a moratorium on AI advances. And that is the opposite of what we want to do. We may as well just tell China, here you go. We're going to hit pause while you catch up or run an extra lap. So I would like to see regulation and legislation come from a place of, first and foremost, like I said, that an understanding of the actual technology, and be guided toward American competitiveness, which frankly, in my mind, includes taking care of American people, not just the outward global aspects of it. But if we don't see that lead that we have, but rather figure out how do we extend it while protecting against some of the major risks, I think that's the framework that I care about.
Alissa, do you have thoughts on where government either should or should not, in the short term, be looking to make a statement?
Yeah, I agree with Tara that we're talking about a dawn of a new age in many ways, and when Congress starts talking about it, they're talking about regulating a nascent technology that is evolving incredibly quickly. I think there's been a remarkable amount of good work done on the executive branch side. I completely agree. NIST put out an AI risk management framework that really makes people think through those questions. But I think that we also have some basic work to do in the US. We haven't done the work on thinking about what goes into models. Again, this is that privacy legislation piece I mentioned. We don't have regulation that dictates what we can and can't do with personal information. And if you're going into a world of AI where that is information that can be used, we need to think about those trade-offs because they will then play out in the world of AI. So that's not the same as asking for AI regulation. I don't think that, I think we're sort of in, again, it's hard to regulate nascent technology, but it doesn't mean that regulatory responses aren't appropriate and aren't sort of important in the age of AI.
Alex, the privacy legislation, I know you testified about it recently. You said there have been 31 hearings, but we now may be moving towards something of a consensus. Do you think that will help address some of the AI concerns, at least from the privacy and the individual perspective, or do we need to think more broadly?
Some part of it. So I think Alyssa's completely right. That's the fundamental. That's like the table setting. Of course, we need to pass that to manage the inputs. Businesses are asking for it, as well as consumer groups. Republicans are asking for it, as well as Democrats. Let's actually get something done. But I do think we need more on the AI piece as well. I agree that right now, use case specific regulation of AI is actually pretty difficult. There's a lot of emergence here. In the case of generative AI, we do get onto free expression and kind of users using it for creative purposes. That makes it quite hard. But there's something we could do that would make the conversation a lot more informed and a lot easier, which is as you look at the executive branch efforts that have happened, even how companies are developing their own responsible AI programs, we're seeing pretty substantial convergence around the elements of trustworthy AI. This basic notion that your models should be effective. They should actually do the thing they were designed to do. They should be transparent. They should be able to explain how they work at the high level and what the outputs are. They should be safe, so they should have data security principles built in. They should have privacy principles built in, and they shouldn't discriminate against people. That's in the White House's AI Bill of Rights. It's in the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. It's in European regulation. And most of the companies with responsible AI frameworks subscribe to those principles too. So one early thing that Congress could do is say, hey, if you're going to be rolling out a high-risk AI use, go through the analysis as to how your tool reads on each of those vulnerabilities and disclose it. You don't have to disclose the source code. We can talk about this in a way that still maintains security and privacy. But let's have everybody do these impact assessments to make sure they're asking the fundamental questions about whether these tools are actually going to be effective and have unintended consequences and harms. It's not a silver bullet, but at the bare minimum, mandating that type of auditing and accountability would then allow us to have a lot more education about how these systems actually work. And it paves the way for downstream businesses to make informed decisions about whether they buy an AI tool, because they'll be able to look at these assessments. And then it allows additional laws to come in. So if a tool is being used in a way that is unsafe, there's product liability claims for that. There are other type, privacy, intellectual property claims. So having at least that transparency and that impact assessment can be a really useful framework from which other interventions can then flow.
This is actually an area where companies that really the emergent class of defense technology companies can actually really help, and where I think what DoD and the intelligence community in the US government have been doing for a little while now, just out of necessity. So as you all know, there are so many companies coming out of Silicon Valley who want to work on defense issues or American competitiveness issues, unlike the way things used to be 10, 15 years ago. So as an example, one of the things that our company does, because we provide visibility for the national security sector into really three things: all of the companies, the capabilities, and the capital that flows through the globe that matters to US national security. So if you are interested in companies' activities, for example, and you as a US defense or intelligence agency are going to launch a counterintelligence action, that is a big deal. And so for AI companies that work with these DoD and intel agencies, we have to open the kimono on exactly those factors. And it's been very productive, I think, because a lot of federal agencies have realized, okay, it doesn't mean we have to own the source code, doesn't mean we shouldn't work with the commercial sector, but we do have to be able to trust and validate the results if we're going to take action. And so there's a dramatic example because the consequences are so high, but frankly, the framework is very strong.
Great. So we're going to turn to the audience now for questions. I'd ask, if you don't mind, please give your name and, if you're comfortable, your affiliation if you have one. Also, please try to be brief and have a question mark at the end. We do have audience, we do have microphones coming, so I'm going to try to move around the room a bit. Congresswoman Harman, maybe I'll go to you if I might first. There's a microphone. There is a mic, yep.
Thanks. Terrific discussion, really excellent. It has been my theory for years that politicians are analog trying to deal with digital problems. And my question is really about the sophistication of people in Congress. Yes, there are a few who actually understand the technology. maybe in both parties, so let's make this bipartisan, but very few. And as Congress, using the fear factor, starts crashing into the AI space, what could we productively do to get the sophistication of policymakers up?
Alex, you spent some time in the Senate. Alissa, you're pretty familiar with Hill folks' thoughts on that question.
So I love that question. And I don't blame the members of Congress, right? Many of them are generalists. They are covering the entire world aperture. There is a lot more sophistication among staff than I think many people in the public realize. And, you know, an errant question in a hearing can sometimes get a lot of steam, but you know that there is a lot of good work happening behind the scenes. That's not just puffery, it is genuinely true that the staff are spending an awful lot of time in direct briefings, understanding kind of what the issues are and what responsible frameworks might look like. The other piece is there's been a tremendous growth on ways of getting people with technical experience into Congress at the staff level. So things like the Tech Congress program, which puts public interest technologists in congressional offices. AAAS has a similar fellowship. They also have this in the federal government too, an increasing number of technologists going into different agencies and doing remarkable work there too. So that needs more resources, it needs more effort, but there's a willing audience there. And I have seen a tremendous uptick in the sophistication on these issues, and actually staff not just being passive recipients of information, which is not what you want a staffer to be. They actually can set an agenda and be asking those hard questions. I have to say, so Senator Schumer made an announcement about his goal for an AI framework this week, and it's wonderful to have the Democratic Majority Leader, the leader of the Senate, speak about the importance of this. But he used a phrase about we're starting at square one. And I have to say it was an arrow to the heart, because there are so many congressional offices who are not starting at square one at all. They've been thinking about this in really responsible ways as dedicated thought partners to CISA and to others for a long time. So there's good raw material there. We still need to shape it in a good direction.
Alissa, anything to add on that?
No, I agree with all that. I think companies have a role to play too. I think it's actually really important for companies to explain what's going on. I think, you know, going back 10 or 15 years, your comment, I think there were a lot of people, a lot of tech companies who avoided Washington altogether. I think that has changed. And I think, you know, there's a role for sort of responsible conversation, not sort of conversation in front of the cameras, where you really sort of explain how technology works, what it looks like, what the benefits are. That is long-term good. And I think the important thing to understand is that that has to be across all the different sectors. So companies have a role to play, but so does civil society, so does the executive branch in that education piece.
Can I tap on with just a specific example? Because I totally agree, Alissa, and ma'am, it's such a good question. A great example, I think, where the Congress members can take the first step to coming to the companies are with task forces, where it brings down the attention and the spotlight perhaps a little bit. So I briefed Representative Alissa Starzak and Representative Mike Gallagher when they ran the Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force, and was able in a small group like that to have actually a really robust and substantive conversation where I believe they learned a lot, and of course we had the opportunity to hopefully help move the needle a little bit. So that's a great example of something that could be done more.
I think there's a question towards the back on the end there.
Hi, everyone. Jenny Castillo from Georgia. How you doing? My question is to you all about how are educators being brought into this space? We started the conversation about research when you were a child, looking at encyclopedias, and now everything's online. But now kids are actually using AI to produce papers. How are they actually going to learn how to be critical thinkers? And are educators a part of this discussion when you're thinking about safety and education and moving forward to the future?
Anyone want that?
I'm happy to take a first cut at that. We have a project at CDT that focuses on the use of technology in schools, and one of the things that we do is actually survey both teachers and parents and students every year on how technology is changing their experience in the classroom. This one was a doozy to write. How fun to figure out how many people are using ChatGPT on papers, and we'll answer a survey question saying they are doing so. But the overall finding, year over year, is that teachers know they need to be teaching this stuff in the classroom. They believe in digital literacy. They know they need to teach privacy. They know that they need to teach people how to parse information online. and they feel they completely lack the resources to do so. So how do we start addressing that at, it's the school CIO level, it's thinking again about kind of libraries and kind of other local efforts that can help provide resources that feel context specific in a particular community so that they feel authentic and not just driven from the top down. There's a huge amount of work to be done there, and then of course at home as well.
And I do think this is one of those areas where, as we think about what the workforce of the future is going to look like, the need that they're going to be working in an environment where AI will enable a lot of jobs that they're going to do, and how they are going to be interacting with AI to do their jobs better. So think of it more or less as a replacement for them to do work, but more as a graphing calculator that they're using to get through their calculus AP exam. So how are we going to help them understand how they're going to use AI in the future so that they're better? And I think that is going to require changes to curriculum and everything else, but it is going to be what the world they enter when they enter careers, and I think it's our obligation to figure out how we help them do that now.
Yeah, I was going to say almost exactly the same point. I think the reality is it is coming, and we have to embrace it in how it gets used, and that means we have to teach people how to use it. So I can tell you kind of a funny story that is worth thinking about and thinking about for students. I had an employee who works for me who's a Gen Zer. She decided she was going to do a piece of work using ChatGPT. And it was a scavenger hunt. We were doing a piece of work because we were doing an event together. And so we did this scavenger hunt that she had used ChatGPT for. But we got to the various things that we were supposed to take pictures at, and there weren't lions on the statue. There wasn't a plaque that we were supposed to take a picture in front of, because ChatGPT isn't always accurate, right? We know that there are hallucinations. And so for students, understanding that what comes out may not be accurate, and learning how to fact check it, learning what they have to do in response to that is an incredibly important piece. The other thing I would say is that transition that Jeff mentioned at the very beginning from encyclopedias in the library to research online was just as significant a transition. And we figured it out, and we continue to figure it out. We sometimes struggle about how to cite things and what to do. But it's not, these aren't unknowns. They're things that we can figure out and move forward. Again, I think Tara's point about not being scared of these as developments is important, and I think that goes for educators as well.
Gentleman standing up at the back.
Hi, this is Dr. Pai from the YMCA. Everybody knows the Y. I'm the only Y guy here. For the sake of the evolving evolutions and revolutions and transcending recipe of human being, I think it's wise to have AI. First of all, I have been working with the lowest population around the world around digital inclusion. And in order to use AI, you need internet. And we have hundreds of millions of people around the world who don't have access to the internet, number one. So I work with elders and low-income community who don't even know how to use email. And they need email to sign up for AI or some sort of identity. And some of us, I hope all of us here can now use Zoom, maybe not. So we have, if we are not careful, we would leave hundreds and millions of people behind. So my main question is, how can we ensure a just transition, as we transition to the AI age? Thank you.
I think an element of it, from the U.S. standpoint, I know the administration has put a fair amount of resources into broadband and other access. The global question, I think, is I don't know if anyone up here is equipped to answer that one. It's a little bit important issue, the inclusion of it. All the conversations that I've been involved in the Aspen Institute, we've talked about the equity, the inclusion, insurance. I offer to folks here if you have thoughts on this.
I can start, Jeff.
Sure.
So 1,000 times yes. It's an excellent point, and I'm glad you raised it. A couple of things come to mind. One, the United States, since we wrote the world order following World War II and navigating through the Cold War, has been all about bringing up all of humanity. And part of what I like about the liberalism that we have promoted in terms of American values has been that global reach. Case in point, look at the network of allies and partners we have around the world. It is better than any other country, certainly any of our adversaries. Look at the impact that our collaboration with the amazing Ukrainian military has had. They are the stars of what they have done over the past year and a half. But our commitment to ensuring they have the materials and resources they need has helped that. And that's because dedication to global interests and globally humanity is just embedded in who we are. So the more that the United States across all fronts, people, private sector, public sector, drive this forward, the more I think that we have a better shot at helping others around the world. Counterpoint would be what you see happening with 5G networks out of China. And the Belt and Road Initiative that has extended into the technology sphere, where I worry about the dependence that we are driving in places like Africa and other regions of Asia, because the United States isn't there helping as much as we could be, and China is stepping in and providing the much needed infrastructure. Well, we know the risks associated with that Chinese infrastructure to both us and our allies. And so those tensions are real, and we should think about all the implications of them.
I am staring at a red light right now, so I'm afraid that's going to have to be it. But I'm sure some of our panelists have a few moments perhaps to stay around. I want to join me in thanking them for their excellent input today. Thank you.